Hey everybody, DreamRoom64 here, and today's video is a review of the RGB-Pi 2. It's an HDMI to SCART adapter, RGB SCART. It works in conjunction with RePlayOS, which is running here on my Raspberry Pi 5, and it's all connected into a CRT TV. And I also tested it on a Sony PVM. The results are fantastic. Now, full disclosure, I was sent the RGB-Pi 2 for beta testing and for review, and I was also sent this. We'll talk about this unique SCART switcher here. I'm not being paid for this review. I really am excited to talk about this because I think it's an awesome combination. When you take RGB-Pi 2, you combine it with RePlayOS, you can do some really interesting things. There's really three interesting things that it can do. It does a lot more than that, but let me just tell you about those three things really quick, and then we'll get into more detail on it. All right, so first of all, you can run Nintendo DS games on a CRT TV. That sounds kind of absurd. It is, but it's a really neat way to play certain games. It looks so much better than you would ever expect. All right, next up, why is there a potato here? Well, because you can watch potato quality videos on your CRT TV and they don't look nearly as bad as they do when you watch them other ways. So, for example, you can download a classic YouTube video in 240p resolution and directly play it back at that 240p resolution on the CRT, and it looks, as far as 240p old YouTube video downloads go, it looks pretty good. Now, next up, you can also emulate tons and tons of arcade games on your CRT TV, and RePlayOS plus the RGB-Pi 2 respect the original vertical resolution and the original refresh rate. So you're getting a very authentic experience. So yes, there are lots of console ports of arcade games, but it's pretty tough to play Space Harrier, for example, on a CRT, especially since there's not an FPGA core out there right now for it, as far as I understand. And that goes for a lot of arcade games. There's kind of a preservation problem with arcade games, and software emulation really has an important role in game preservation, I'd say. So with all that said, let's jump into the specifics on some of that, and I'll tell you a lot more about what makes RePlayOS so special. So let's jump over to the Nintendo DS. I'll show you some footage of that and one of the cool things you can do. Now, one of the really neat things you can actually do, I didn't test this. I don't have two RGB-Pi 2 adapters, but if you did, you could actually run, if you're a true mad lad, you could run two CRT TVs, both plugged into your Raspberry Pi 5, outputting each screen of the DS. I did test that with monitors in my previous video, LCD monitors, and it works. So I'm confident it would work if you really want to do that. But what I tested for this video is I tested DS games running on a single screen. And the kinds of games I played, I can easily toggle between the two screens. I don't need to see both simultaneously. And seeing the Nintendo DS in 240p is not something I'd ever expected that I'd really enjoy, but it really looks good, especially given the ambiscan feature of RePlayOS. It has this unique ability to fill the outside borders of the screen. Rather than scaling the image up, it shows you the gameplay in the real resolution, and then it fills the outside borders with a gentle, this is optional, of gentle changing colors. It's subtle. In some games, it just looks completely natural. Like in Phoenix Wright, it just looks like it's part of the video, part of the original feed, and it's nice. And it kind of takes my mind off of some of the geometry problems of CRTs, because I haven't done any real maintenance on my consumer CRT here or my PVM, so the geometry is not perfect, and I think it helps a little bit with that. All right, now on to the potato thing, okay? So like I said, you can download, so you can't stream videos to RePlayOS, you have to download stuff, but I downloaded some classic YouTube videos. Like I downloaded, well, you know this one, right? Hopefully, Boom Headshot. It's just such a funny video, but the quality's so poor. It was really cool to be able to see it on a CRT TV at actual 240p resolution, because let's say you try to play that on a PS3. Well, PS3 can't even output 240p. So it is kind of hard to play back a 240p video on your CRT. This let me do it, and that was pretty interesting. Now, another thing I tried ripping a DVD. So I took the first DVD in the first season of Pokemon here, ripped it on my computer to an MKV file. It was a 3.6 gigabyte file. It plays back super fast. I can jump through that video in 5-minute increments at the tap of a shoulder button, or with the D-pad, I can jump 15 seconds forward and back. The playback control in RePlayOS, it's using this, the software is called Alpha Player. It is a little bit limited. The playback controls aren't perfect, but it is definitely fast. and it's very good for an early version of this software. Now, another use case for this video playback capability is, let's say you want to rip a DVD, a whole series, and like make your own personal archive. So Curb Your Enthusiasm, I think, would be a good example. It's a really funny show. The first, I think, 6 seasons are in 4:3 aspect ratio. You try to stream this on, I've seen it on Amazon, I think it's also on HBO. They destroy the show. They take that 4:3 image, they crop it down to 16:9. The show was shot on really low res cameras. It's awful what they've done to it on the streaming services. So if you had the DVD, you could rip it and you can play it on your TV without the DVD player and in really good quality. And I just think that's pretty neat. All right, and then also I tested out some of my own videos. So I tried out, hey, can I run one of my own 4K videos? No, it won't play a 4K video on the CRT TV. But what I then tried was I took my video, I re-encoded it with Handbrake down to a 240p video. And that's actually what's running on my TV right here throughout this video is one of my own videos. And this is not really an ideal way to watch my content, but it was more of a proof of concept. Yeah, you can actually watch, you can actually play back any video you want at 240p. Or also, one of those YouTube videos, I tried Leroy Jenkins. I tried that, a 480p download, and then I also downloaded a 240p version of it, and you can clearly see a difference. It plays back the 480p video file at 480i, looks very sharp. I can read the names of the players on screen, and then the 240p version plays back at 240p and looks a whole lot less sharp. But as far as 240p video goes, I think this is a really interesting solution to get those onto your CRT TV. So I found this to be a really convenient way to go about that. All right, now let's talk a little bit more about, Let's talk a little bit more about arcade games before we move on to another subject. So RePlayOS has cores built in for MAME, Final Burn Neo, and Flycast, so you can actually run Naomi games. And then, of course, you can hook up any kind of joystick you want, but if you really want to go to the extreme, RePlayOS supports custom joysticks built by hand and then plugged into the GPIO pins. There's a custom driver for that, so a 2-player driver. So that's interesting. I'm not going to go into that today, but something I wanted to note. Now, one thing you need to understand is that a lot of arcade games use very strange video timings. Smash TV and Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, and I'm just using console games here for reference, but those games, when you play them on a CRT TV, like my American consumer CRT TV, it doesn't want to cooperate with those non-standard timings. The picture just flips over and over. So keep that in mind. Your TV might not be compatible, but my PVM, my Sony PVM, does cooperate. Now, I also tested out some vertical games. Like I said, Naomi runs on there. So I tested out the Naomi version of Ikaruga. That was pretty neat. And I also tested out some other shoot 'em ups. I think the RePlayOS plus RGB-Pi 2 is a really cool way to run a whole bunch of different shoot 'em ups. I also tested out Donkey Kong. Pretty cool to see that at home, rotated vertically. Miss Pac-Man was neat. And then let's talk about light guns for a minute here, or a few minutes. Light guns are supported in RePlayOS. So what you can do is you can plug a GunCon 2, only one GunCon 2 at a time. So you can't do 2 GunCon 2s. Unfortunately, no multiplayer simultaneous GunCon play. But you just plug it in. There's a driver in there pre-installed, and you give it sync. And to get sync out of the RGB-Pi 2, you just want to use the 3.5 millimeter jack on the side. It doesn't come with a cable, but I actually have an old cable here, believe it or not, from my Zune. Yeah, my Zune right there, the Zune dock. And you can get then sync for the video out there. It's not composite video, but it is sync for your light gun. And you can also get an alternative way to route your audio out of the RGB-Pi 2 with that jack. So it's nice that it has that feature. And then in terms of gaming with the GunCon 2, it's pretty impressive. So like I have here in my hand, Lethal Enforcers, that game runs very well on the FB Neo core. MAME, it also runs well, but it doesn't. The light gun support in MAME is messed up, right, at least for now. But you can run it in FB Neo. I tested that; it works very well. I'm impressed with it. Now, in terms of consoles, I wanted to focus console light gun gaming. I wanted to focus my testing on these 3 right here because I have experience with PS1, NES, and some experience with the Dreamcast, and I'm really impressed. So check out the footage of me playing Point Blank 2 through RePlayOS on through the RGB-Pi 2. I can play that game at lightning speed. It's remarkably responsive. It's virtually as good as original hardware there. I think that's pretty impressive. And then I also tested out Time Crisis. And Time Crisis ran very well. It responded very well in my testing, and I thought that this is a pretty nice way to go about playing that. Now, what about the NES Zapper? Well, RePlayOS works very well for NES Zapper games, but my complaint is really just a personal preference. I like to use the original Zapper to play games, and using the original Zapper on original hardware, it just feels different because of how the trigger clicks and all that. So RePlayOS wouldn't be my preferred way to do that, but it does work very well. Just doesn't quite have the same feel. All right, now, on the contrary, I tested out the Dreamcast, so House of the Dead 2. It runs great. What about the original light gun that we got in America? We got this thing, Pelican or Mad Catz branded. Oh, it's terrible. I actually prefer to use the GunCon 2 through RePlayOS to run that, I think, than the Pelican gun here. It's so inaccurate, and the game runs very well. I'm impressed. The developer of RePlayOS has this. He really worked out some bugs in that driver and got it running great. I do think occasionally I have some problems with RePlayOS aiming off screen to reload, but it still overall is very impressive. And RePlayOS, although I can't test everything, I didn't have time to test everything, I was pretty impressed with how well light gun support works. All right, now let's talk about how to get this up and running on an American consumer CRT TV. So it's in some cases it's kind of easy, in other cases a little bit not so easy. So if you have a TV with component video input, right? Because in America we didn't get RGB SCART. In Europe, you just plug the thing in, you're good, you're set. I do envy that. But in America, you need something like a video transcoder here. I'm using the RetroTink RGB2 comp. Now the one in my hand here is actually the comp to RGB. Don't buy that one. Buy the one that I have written here on the sticky note. That's going in the correct direction of converting RGB SCART to YPB PR component. Now, unfortunately though, this costs $80, and then it adds some clunkiness to the setup because you got cables coming out of 3 ends of this thing, including a USB power cord. So not exactly ideal. The actual RGB Pi 2, if you're in Europe, is just so convenient and so nicely well designed. Now another thing, if you're in America, maybe you have a Sony PVM, you have to switch one setting in RePlayOS's settings to get the correct sync. I found out that XOR mode works. What does that mean? I can't really tell you, but it fixes some problems you might have. And then you just need a breakaway cable like this. I got this one on eBay years ago. Instantly, I can plug the RGB Pi 2 in and play on my PVM, which was a very good experience. And then finally, if you have a TV that is composite only, well, like this one here, and I love this little TV, unfortunately, there's not really an easy, cheap way to go about that. You can buy a transcoder similar to this one. I saw one on eBay, but I didn't test it myself. I don't know how good it is. So keep that in mind. I'd say that the RGB Pi 2 is really ideal for the European consumer. Now, another thing that's really ideal for the European consumer is that SCART switch that was sent to me. This thing only costs 40 euros. So for comparison, you look down here at the SCART switch of choice that I use, which is the G-Comp switch. This goes for $350 US, and you have to get on a long waiting list. Now, this is more feature packed. It's got automatic switching and all that, but I think for 40 euros, I just wanted to call this out, that this is a good choice for a lot of people. It has 3 inputs, 3 outputs. It has RCA audio jacks that are always on, and then it has what looks like a composite jack at the top, but that's not composite. That's actually light gun sync. So if you don't want to use that 3.5 millimeter jack on the side of the RGB Pi 2, you can use that jack on this guy here. And then I also tested this, I stress tested this with 3 different consoles plugged in at once. So one of the consoles was RePlayOS through the RGB Pi 2. And then I had a PS2 connected with a light gun connected to the sync. And I had a Dreamcast. I'm talking about original consoles here, PS2 and Dreamcast plugged in. And no problems. There's no interference. This thing is properly made. I like the form factor of it. It doesn't slide around much. It has little rubber pads on the bottom, and all the cords are facing the right direction for decent cable management. I think it's a nice little product. And there's another one that has 6 in, 1 out that you could use in reverse for 1 in, 6 out if you're like a CRT hoarder. No shame in that. You could make a switch that combines 2 of these with a total of 8 inputs, or even more if you really want to go wild. And these are just affordable, and they're in stock, and they're on the same site where you buy the RGB Pi 2, which is called Mortaca.com. Ships out of Spain, as far as I understand. Now, in terms of value, I want to talk about the price of the RGB Pi 2. So the RGB Pi 2 is listed at 50 euros, and it's in stock. It's not something you have to pre-order. I really respect that. Now, I'm accustomed to paying a lot of money for custom RGB SCART cables. These are boutique products, they're handmade. They often cost around that much. Usually not quite that much, but at more than half that. So to me, the 50 euro price is fair, because I look at it like this is a boutique product. This is not mass produced. This is not something that you buy on Amazon for cheap. This is something special. So RePlayOS actually does let you use a cheap DAC if you want. Like I initially tested with this one here for my first review video because I didn't have my hands on the RGB-Pi 2 beta testing unit yet. This worked pretty well, but it didn't work with 480i sources. It looked all jittery and messed up. So you buy something that's off-brand, you buy something generic, it might work, you might save some money, but you're not guaranteed a 24-bit video DAC, you're not guaranteed a 24-bit audio DAC, you're not guaranteed compatibility. To me, it's worth the asking price for that guarantee. Plus, I love how clean and simple that RGB-Pi 2 device is. It's just, you plug a single HDMI cable in there. It's a mini HDMI to micro HDMI, and it just works so well. And then right here, I wanted to note that in my first video, I talked about RePlayOS. I talked about the micro SD, where I just recommend putting everything onto a micro SD. Well, instead, what I'd say now, if you happen to have an old SSD laying around, what you can do is get one of these inexpensive adapters that converts USB to SATA, and you can just plug that in for your storage device. Because every time you want to update RePlayOS, you have to wipe that micro SD card, and that's a little bit inconvenient to do. Okay. Let's go over here and talk about input lag. So my litmus test, as usual, is to run Super Mario Bros. 1 and see how it feels. I can play Super Mario Bros. 1 on RePlayOS through the RGB-Pi 2, no problem whatsoever. It feels fantastic. Now, being a little bit more scientific, I wanted to test to see if there's any input lag added by the RGB-Pi 2. And unfortunately, I couldn't test it with the time sleuth. It wouldn't cooperate with that 480i output of the time sleuth. I also tested loading a custom firmware onto it. I used 5 different computers, 6 different operating systems to try to load up the software to reprogram the FPGA inside the time sleuth. I just couldn't get it to work to load other resolutions as well. The RGB-Pi 2, it's designed to be specifically compatible with RePlayOS. It's not locked down to not work with other things, but it wouldn't work. So unfortunately, I don't have a scientific reading, but I can tell you, Super Mario Bros. 1 definitely worked very well. All right, and another thing I can confirm, this is good news. If you remember my original review video of RePlayOS, I said, hey, you know what? I can't play this game quite as well as on original hardware. I think there's some audio lag or something. That was the case. So the developer of RePlayOS found a solution to significantly reduce audio lag. I can now play Parappa the Rapper way better. I wouldn't say I can play it exactly as well as original hardware, but it's really close now, and I can get to the second to last stage, no problem. All right, now let's talk quickly about a point of contention, and that is that the operating system, the user interface of RePlayOS is locked down. It's not open source, and it uses a lot of open source emulators to run everything. I don't really have a problem with that. The way I see it is that the developer, RTA, he goes by, he gives full credit to all the open source emulators he's using. He also contributes some things to the open source community, like the driver for the GunCon. And I really like a whole lot of things in the retro gaming world that are a little bit closed down. I don't mind it. The people that made these products here are passionate. They know what they're doing, and they made some awesome stuff. They made a very coherent product. Now, the guy working on the RGB-Pi 2, he goes by ATG online, and then RTA working on the operating system. I think that these two guys are just doing amazing stuff. And what I say is let them cook. I think they're doing a fantastic job at what they're trying to do, and I'm not trying to get in their way. I'm really happy with what they've done. Now, to close the video out, I just want to talk briefly about a little bit one weakness for RePlayOS, because I've been very positive. As most of you probably are aware, software emulation of Nintendo 64 is just not perfect, but FPGAs now can actually beat original hardware in terms of frame rate for a lot of games. So this is a little bit of a weakness for RePlayOS. These games up here run very well, all right, almost perfectly. The game in there, Super Smash Bros., as well as Smash Remix, the patched version of Super Smash Bros., that's really neat. That runs very well, but then the bottom row of games here, I have some issues with, like visual glitches in these two. Can't move the camera, pretty big problem, and then flickering all over the screen. So RePlayOS is not perfect. It's very good. You know what else isn't perfect? Because original hardware is not perfect. It's very inconvenient. It's very expensive. It can be very frustrating when things fail. FPGAs also are not perfect. You're missing cores for a whole lot of things, particularly arcade games. And your compatibility for what you can emulate with an FPGA, at least for today and the foreseeable future, really peaks at the Nintendo 64. So I would say that software emulation has an important role in game preservation, and this pairing of RePlayOS plus RGB-Pi 2 makes it easier than ever to emulate games with beautiful quality on a CRT TV with authentic video timings. I think that this is a really fantastic thing. I would say that really this pairing is my CRT TV's new best friend, and I hope more people try it out. I think it's really awesome stuff. It's going to earn a spot on my G-Comp switch, and it already has a spot down here on my power switch, which, well, it's not turned on right now because I don't have it hooked up all yet, but it's got a spot. So let me know what you think about all the stuff I said. I think this is awesome. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope to catch you in the next one. Bye.